The Nomiki Show.
We're excited to have Anthony Conwright on for the first time. Anthony is a writer and educator based in New York, currently working on his debut novel, Speak Blackness, and his writing has appeared in many places, including Mother Jones, The Nation, Huffington Post, and The New Republic, where he has a piece out right now titled American Education is Founded on White Race Theory. Oh my God, paging Tucker Carlson. Have you gotten any personal text messages from him challenging this? Because he loves to text people, we've seen.
No, luckily I'm not on his radar yet, so I haven't received any text messages from him.
Oh, so should we pitch you to go on his show to debate him? Because that would be real fun.
That would be the day.
Yeah. All right. So I don't think our audience is going to be too surprised that our education system is founded on whether it's a white-centered, education premise or blind spots all over the place, because so much of our education policy has been designed by white men. But you say white race theory. So how would you define that?
So that's an interesting question. So in terms of white race theory, what I was really talking about was in response to the critical race theory backlash, people are kind of forgetting or at least pretending that the educational system wasn't founded on the premise that being white was better than being Black. And embedded in that were a lot of racist thoughts and feelings toward Black people. And so I was really trying to say with the whole piece and the kind of what the title hints at is that the system was created with a white centric view of everything. And so that's kind of the roots of the structure of the system.
Okay. So white centric view of everything. Mm-hmm. When you say it was created then, when is the creation? Like, when did our modern education system sort of come? When did it go from being like a schoolhouse down the road that the local mama dropped the kids at, to being like an actual design system?
So it's kind of interesting in the sense that before the Committee of 10 in 1892, you had this situation going back to the 1700s, 1800s, early 1800s, where school education was really handled at the state level, right? And so you had you might have a college or a high school in one place, and that high school and college doesn't know what this other high school is doing or this other college is doing. And so there were situations where in a high school's graduating class, you might have 20 different students trying to prepare for 20 completely different college entrance requirements. So everything was kind of in chaos. So you might have to know some Latin over here. You might need to know geometry for this school, but this other school requires vulgar math or something like that. And when you have a population increase and people moving from high school to college, there needed to be a system for organization. And so in 1892, you had the first creation or attempt to create a national sort of curriculum for college entrance, and trying to figure out, okay, what are the subjects that are taught within high school that are kind of common? And so I would say the report that the Committee of 10 delivered after their meeting was really kind of the solidifying the structure at the beginning of the structure that we have now.
And the Committee of 10 were white men?
Yes.
And how were they found? Who found them? Why them?
So it's interesting. They were just kind of men that were just known, not that they didn't have, these venerated positions like president of Columbia or Harvard or something like that, the commissioner for education. but it wasn't as if, they were like, all right, guys, we need we need to get like 10 guys together and we need to make it as diverse as possible. It wasn't so it was.
They don't even do that now.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so it was kind of just picked off of, just titles, positions, duties, that sort of thing.
Okay, so prior to that, I mean, it's interesting because you say like there was no uniformity, there was no if there were 20 kids in a class, they were expected to have 20 different paths to go to college, but that's assuming that those 20 people in the class even have access to college. I mean, just from basic free education, like who was getting a free education?
Right. So, education, depending on what state you were in, you might have had a different experience. However, to your point, the Committee of 10, that report, that's where high school as the tool to prepare students for college, that's where that idea came about. And so after in the report, they basically said, well, the purpose of high school is college prep. So before that, that wasn't as much of a thing. Obviously, if you were white and you were male and you were wealthy, you were more than likely to have a college track, right? But if you were not that, then it might be less likely. And after the report of the Committee of 10, you had for the really the first time, like a solidifying of the idea that the purpose of high school is college prep.
Okay, so where does the race side come in? Like how, when the Committee of 10 came together and said, all right, this is the basis of what every student who goes to one of the colleges, I assume that these were all Ivy League schools or in that little circuit of private schools. This is what they need to know. And by the way, like for folks who may not know, Ivy League schools still have this system, like where it's been expanded, but like there are fundamentals that they kind of all agree, like, you have to read this type of literature, you have to take this type of, math, you have to take this many classes in language. And I'm sure it's evolved a little bit, but probably not perfect. So where did the racial aspect come in? Like, was there an actual white agenda, or was it like just blinders because they were all white?
I think it was a little bit of both. So, so let's say if a person wanted to have like good faith, right, that these guys were just blind, that doesn't mean that the racism was not explicit, if that makes sense. And so whenever you're creating a structure or a system and you're not purposefully involving other cultures or perspectives, or if you're creating the system, and let's say you say something like, wow, Anglo-Saxon culture is where everybody else gets their culture, and they're the main thought of history. And every student, or the purpose of the curriculum, should really be to get people to be Anglo-Saxons. Well, right there, you may not be saying, well, like, I really hate Black people. I hate their culture. They have no culture. You just freed them. They know nothing. So let's ignore them. You don't have to say it for that to be the implied result, right? Or even the result in itself. So when you read the report, they don't say anything that's like that. They don't say like, God, I hate Black people or something. It's not quite like that. But what they do say in the report is you can read this veneration of Anglo-Saxon culture. And so that is very much present. So they don't necessarily say white, but they refer to as like, being Anglo-Saxon. But in writings that members of the Committee of 10 did, they engage in blatant like racism, right? So
you mean between the members, you mean, of the committee?
Oh, even just
personal, their own writings.
Right, exactly. In their own writings, they said some pretty blatant like racist things for example, that Black people, the slavery benefited Black people in the sense that they were able to learn Anglo-Saxon culture, or they were able to learn white culture from slavery.
So many things there.
Right. Exactly. And so it's really that sort of thing that was present.
I forgive me because I don't know this, but were Black people allowed to go to these colleges then, or like was there women weren't until a certain point? I mean, of course, Frederick Douglass was well educated. I mean, there are a lot of iconic, but was it just Black colleges, or were they allowed to go to a Columbia or a Yale at that time?
I couldn't tell you when Yale or Columbia began to admit Black people, but really, right? And when you're thinking about a structure, you're not really, and you're thinking about racism, the individual bodies in a place, the individual Black bodies in a place doesn't make a thing sort of like less racist, or it's not right. And I know that you're not implying that, but like I can see people going, oh, wait a minute, but there were Black people at this place, so that it couldn't have been as racist. But you're talking about a structure that was designed to make people patriots and to make them have like an Anglo-Saxon consciousness, right? And so that right there, no matter if there are 10 Black kids in that kind of classroom. In fact, if that's the purpose of the education, you can have a classroom, just all Black people, and you still are going to get that kind of racist instruction. And so I think when it comes to education, we really have to think structurally, right? So if you're saying, okay, we need to create standards for history, right, or social studies. Well, you have to, if we were going to, let's say, redesign it, let's say that, Joe Biden says, we're going to revisit this committee of 10 thing, and we're going to redo everything. You might ask a different set of questions in 2021 than they asked in 1892 to design that system.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my question is how was this just to make sure that a majority or almost totally white male group of people being educated were completely oblivious to the actual history, or was it also to do so with people of color that were going to? I mean, it doesn't matter either way. It was the structural, origins of this all. I mean, we see how it got to where we are now. I'm just trying to think how much this was. So much, like, was there even a conversation about having, I mean, was it just like sort of put in their faces, or was there a conversation like at the time? Was there controversy? Were there people being educated saying, why are we only having white men dictate? Like, was there a critical race theory conversation then? Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know what? So I might phrase it like this. There were dissenting opinions like in the report, right? And there's even an essay in the report. It's called, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name, but it's basically talking about and instructing former slaves. And I cannot think of the name of it. It's escaping me. It'll come to me later on. But in the essay, and so when you read it, there are parts of it that feel very liberal. So this is a white man who definitely had some racist views, but said things like, well, Black teachers should teach Black students because the most important part of that relationship is love and understanding. And a white person can't love and understand a Black pupil. But then he flips it and goes, but Black teachers shouldn't teach white kids. That's kind of the implication. And so you have that kind of dissenting opinion. And also at the same time, Tuskegee is being developed. And so when you so when you look at the kind of thought and process that people went about when thinking about how to create Black schools. It was different. And so there was a critical race theory kind of controversy, but it just didn't have that name, of course.
What seems so interesting to me now is like how these structural issues didn't seem to be ever addressed. It's like they were put in system and then it wasn't like, like the Constitution, we're always debating.
Right.
It's a living, breathing document, supposedly. Great day to talk about that. But
yeah.
But like something like this, it just seems like, I don't know, maybe 40 years in, we'd have a bigger conversation about, oh, wait, history. Like, why are we not discussing slavery in a deeper way? Why are we not talking about, right. Especially because history books in particular are constantly being updated.
Right.
Has other than right now, have we had these moments, at least in the education space, not necessarily in the national dialogue, but in the education space about going back and just scrapping everything? The way that I don't know, Christians do in Texas.
Right. Well, yes. And no, I feel like traditionally it's always been pushback from Black people saying we want to be included in this structure, and having essentially to prove that we have a place, right? So, for example, we had Carter G. Woodson, Negro History Week, and then you have the 60s African American Studies, Black Studies programs, and all of that was really in protest to the current structure. But I think in terms of just saying, hey, let's scrap everything, we kind of haven't really. We've had it in terms of should we have high stakes standardized testing, right? And but I don't think as a country we've really sat back and said, do we really need this test? We just had to think about it, right, because of the pandemic, which unfortunately we haven't really taken a moment to reflect, oh, well, why do we have an SAT? Where does that come from? Oh, College Board. Oh, they were on the Committee of 10. Oh, that's weird. In their first writings about testing, they said the same thing about testing that we are actually saying today. And so we've never really kind of looked at it, because a lot of these things are money-making ventures, right? So high stakes testing generates a lot of money, but does that necessarily does an SAT score necessarily determine what a kid's going to be? Does it measure their potential? No, of course not. There are lots of people who don't do well at SAT in the SAT or even in college and then become highly successful. And so I think the hard part is on the left-hand side, on the left, you have liberals who value enlightenment and education and prestige in colleges, and it's hard for those liberals to let that go. And then you have conservatives that are okay with dividing society into the haves and have-nots and the no's and no-nots. And so they're okay with the SAT kind of acting as this discriminatory filter.
On that note, this obsession by the right wing right now with critical race theory, I find it fascinating that it's coming at this moment. It's something obviously they've been fighting over for a while, but
right.
But during the pandemic, it just seems like it's emerged in the last 4 or 5 months as the major crisis. If you're watching Fox News or any of the right wing places, it is the major crisis in America. Meanwhile, also happening while kids have been at home. So, where do you think this stems from? Why now? Is this just an opportunity to tap into people's insecurities and blame another? What do you think?
So the Republicans, for as much as I disagree with their entire platform, and I will go to my grave saying their party platform is like the platform like white supremacy. Like literally, if you were to go to like a Ku Klux Klan website and like take it and to compare it to the Republican platform, it would read kind of similar. They know how to organize. The Republican Party, their marketing and their organization is on point. But like, I hate it. I disagree with it. But damn, they know how to do it. And they were really, really clever in taking advantage of the narrative that was both on the left and the right of the rioting and the looting of during the George Floyd protests, and attaching that to Black Lives Matter, and then being able to, and then knowing that, wow, Americans are really buying all of this nonfiction literature on anti-racism and white fragility and the Black experience. And we can't compete with that in this moment because this Black man was killed so egregiously and so publicly. We can't really say anything. But what we can do is demonize the literature by attaching it to this thing called critical race theory. And we're going to conflate some like bad teaching practices with critical race theory, and then use children as like the fear mongering stimulus. And so I just think it was a well implemented strategy. Like I just think it's really to appeal to the base and to get people who may have been on the fence about Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, the protests, all those things. It was a way to say, to get the people who go, okay, racism is bad, but I'm not racist, and to really appeal to that crowd.
Right. That's a very well said. At the beginning of the show, we were talking about how, this exactly, Republicans are so well organized at a time when we should be winning everywhere. We have the numbers, we have diversity, we have, mobilization, obviously. And yet, things like what happened in Texas could happen overnight. And of course, we see civil rights being there's a wrecking ball being taken to civil rights because they're organized. So well said, Anthony.
Exactly.
Anthony, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you. Thank you for saying that. I mean, like I taught in middle school at a liberal charter school in San Diego, and I can tell you that not one time did critical race theory ever come up. Like I'm
shocked that at a charter school that would never come up.
Right. It like never came up. It's like not a thing. It's completely made up and fabricated. And so, Republicans are just good at organizing and messaging.
I mean, if Democrats were smart, they'd be like, thank you so much. We're now going to actually shove it down your throats in states that you're actually going to lose in. And then you can have a real conversation about it.
Exactly.
You got to play rough. Take ownership of it.
Right. Exactly. But the problem is the Democrats are trying to do this thing where they don't want to take an affirmative position on something. So the Democrats' best strategy is to always go, we are not Republicans. And in the ways that we are, we're not as Republican as the Republicans. And so, and at some point, like they're going to realize, I think it's going to be bad that not being Republican is not really a selling point. And at some point in time, like you're not going to be able to throw Black people at voters. You're not going to be able to throw women at voters and be like, look at this shiny social progress mantle that I have in front of you. Vote for us. It's not gonna work. Unfortunately, Kamala Harris is like a great example of that. She's like in the primaries, nobody really was into her, and then all of a sudden she became this venerated like figure, and people are making these like weird posters, like all these things, and then now like check out the approval rating. Like I have nothing against her, but it's more against like the structure of power and then the messaging. It's like, if you believe Black Lives Matter, then be for universal healthcare, be for universal childcare in college and all these things. But then they're embedded in the same structure and have the same values as Republicans. So they don't know how to even, they just don't know how to take affirmative positions because they're so afraid of giving a message that might turn away some of the more conservative voters on the left.
It would help if they mobilized, working class voters, then you wouldn't have to have that exchange. But that would mean surrendering their donations.
Right. Exactly.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the great piece, and let us know when your book is out. We'd love to talk about it.
Oh, thank you. Will do. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.